Today is my great honor to welcome our guests to discuss some of the themes explored in yesterday's film screening called Have You Ever Seen a River Stop? To begin with our chair, Glenn Shepard, an ethnobotanist, medical anthropologist, photographer, filmmaker, and curator from the Geldi Museum in Belém. Since 2010, Glenn has collaborated in the training of indigenous Kayapo filmmakers, has portrayed in a new exhibition he helped to curate at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Olinda Muniz Silva Wenderli, aka Yawar, is from the Tupinamba and Pataxó Hahehe people. I'm sorry if this is not the right pronunciation, Olinda. She's a journalist, a filmmaker, and an activist. She writes and edits the Po Brasil Noticias blog and is a coordinator of the Capora project created in 2016 with the scope of environmental education and reforestation of the Pataxó Hahehe area. She is the author of both film Equilíbrio and Capora, O Chamado das Vadas. And finally, we have Leticia Oliveira, who's participating with us on behalf of the movement of people affected by dams, MAB. This movement has existed in Brazil since 1991. They denounce the construction of dams as energy models and their impact on community lives, underlining the need for state to create a national policy that will guarantee in law the rights of those affected by dams. MAB, the movement featured and collaborated in the making of Carolina Caicedo's film O Rio, Agente Rio, and their long-term project Be Damned. It's with a great pleasure that we can start our conversation. I will switch my camera off, but first of all, we start with a short statement from MAB, from a woman that has directly experienced one of the very dramatic events of the last history of Brazil and of the world. So I will be sharing my screening now.
Meu nome é Simone Silva, eu sou atingida pelo crime da Vale, Samarco, BHP e Fundação Renova. A Fundação Renova foi criada para reparar os danos causados pela Vale, Samarco e BHP, mas na realidade ela tem atuado como assessoria técnica das mineradoras, os recursos, dinheiros, né? Os valores que deveriam ser gastos na reparação têm sido gastos na retirada de direito das vítimas, tem sido gasto na maquiagem, nas mídias, nas propagandas, tanto é que se vocês assistirem aí, vocês vão achar que as vítimas já foram indenizadas, que as vítimas estão felizes, tiveram suas vidas de volta, mas na realidade ela tem atuado fortemente na defesa das mineradoras, não na defesa da vítima, não na reparação da vítima. Nós temos várias pessoas contaminadas pelos metais tóxicos, proveniente da lama da barragem de Fundão. As pessoas estão adoecidas, as pessoas estão contaminadas, as pessoas estão morrendo devido a essa contaminação, porque esses metais no organismo das pessoas provocam câncer e várias outras doenças. E nós temos vários atingidos com laudos, com exames médicos que comprovam que estão contaminados, que são provenientes do crime da Vale, Samarco e BHP, mas nada acontece. E todos os direitos que nós tínhamos conquistado ao longo desses 6 anos, com muita luta, com muita manifestação, com muita ocupação de escritório, com muita paralisação de linha de trem, todos esses direitos que a gente tinha conquistado agora estão sendo retirados novamente. As empresas estão conseguindo retirar os nossos direitos novamente através da justiça da 12ª vara, que todas as demandas, todas as pautas, tudo que o atingido tinha conquistado, reassentamento, todos os direitos foram levados para a 12ª vara. e o juiz da 12ª Vara, o Moro de Minas, tem atuado na defesa das empresas. Ele tem dado canetada, ele tem dado as sentenças favoráveis às empresas e não às vítimas. Então, são 6 anos de luta, são 6 anos de sofrimento, são 6 anos de adoecimento mental, são 6 anos de retirada de direito. O crime não aconteceu em 5 de novembro de 2015 e acabou. O crime continua acontecendo todos os dias nas nossas vidas. Todos os dias há uma nova barragem da injustiça, da justiça que rompe nas nossas vidas.
Well, I guess to start the conversation, I know that there's been a lot of focus on the Bolsonaro administration, particularly in the international media, about the assaults on environmental rights, indigenous rights. But I think it's important, and this video makes clear, that these same processes have been going on for decades in Brazil and across Latin America. And I think it's important. The Bolsonaro administration is sort of the accumulation, the maximum expression of interests that were there all along and that have been causing these impacts and this damage to the environment and to people in different parts of Brazil, indigenous, non-indigenous people. And so I think it's an important time to sort of step back and look at this longer historical perspective rather than focusing on the immediate, the worst news coming out of Brazil today. This is part of a much bigger pattern. Leticia?
Hello, I'm Leticia. I'm from the movement of people affected by dams, MAB in Portuguese, MAB. And I live in a city where the dam broke 5 years ago, like the Simone's video talk about, and the Carolina Caicedo's movie talk about too, this situation here almost 6 years ago.
E Olinda, eu sei que você não fala português, mas eu expliquei que esse filme que a gente viu trata como que muitas pessoas pensam muito a administração do Bolsonaro, cada retrocesso que está acontecendo hoje na administração do Bolsonaro, na destruição do ambiente, estava dizendo que é um processo muito mais longo, que essa atropelação dos direitos indígenas não é só história de muito tempo. Se você podia comentar sobre sua experiência, esse filme, aí eu faço a tradução para o inglês. Pode ser?
Tá certo. Os 2 filmes que vão ser exibidos, os 2 falam da questão ambiental, né? Primeiro eu fiz o Caapora, chamado Das Matas, e é um filme que fala mesmo da relação dos povos indígenas com essa entidade que é a Caapora, que na cosmovisão indígena é uma entidade que ela é responsável por equilibrar as coisas, né? Então, assim, a gente acredita que a gente só precisa pegar da natureza aquilo que é o necessário para a nossa sobrevivência, né?
Eu vou traduzir até ali, tá? And so she's saying that that these issues brought up in the film clip we just saw are some of the same issues that she addresses in the films that she's made. The first one, Capora, about an indigenous, about an entity of the forest that's there to protect the forest. E aí pode continuar?
E aí, quando eu fiz Capora, que foi um filme que, na verdade, eu fiz para uma exposição de arte da Pinacoteca, eu fiz muito nessa visão mesmo, enquanto indígena, e utilizando muitos elementos do que eu acredito, do que os povos indígenas acreditam. E aí também eu percebi que, na verdade, muitos não indígenas não conseguiam compreender o filme, no sentido, assim, né, do que ele trazia, assim, de concreto, assim, as pessoas ficavam meio perdidas, então trazia muito elemento da coisa, da cultura mesmo dos povos indígenas, e essa questão de, assim, acho que as pessoas meio que entenderam a questão principal, né, que era uma questão de recuperação, né, de educação, mas não entendeu muita coisa, assim, do discurso, mas aí depois eu fiz um segundo filme que foi Equilíbrio.
So she says my first film, which was for an art exhibit at the Pinacoteca in São Paulo, was Caipora, about this indigenous, it was a film about environmental questions, but from a very strongly indigenous perspective. And I felt like the audience a lot of the non-indigenous peoples couldn't quite understand because it was so heavily built upon the indigenous concepts and experiences. And so the second film, Equilíbrio, that she made, she was thinking, I was thinking about that as for a broader audience, for non-indigenous peoples to understand these complex concepts.
E aí, nesse segundo filme, que foi Equilíbrio, eu acabei usando a personagem, né, que é a entidade, que é a Pora, para fazer Equilíbrio. E eu acredito que Equilíbrio é um filme mais direto, né, ele fala da questão ambiental, mas ele fala de uma forma muito mais direta. No Caapora, eu falei, mas fui sutil, e aí também, nesse sentido, eu acho que na construção do segundo filme, eu entendo que eu fiz uma linguagem mais para o não índio mesmo entender, assim, sabe? Estão fazendo merda com o planeta, a gente está vivendo nesse mundo que é um mundo maravilhoso, a gente tem esse planeta que é o único planeta que a gente conhece, né, para habitar, assim, que esse lugar é maravilhoso, sabe? E que a gente está fazendo muita merda com esse planeta. E nós somos divididos em classes sociais, e a humanidade trata algumas pessoas que lutam, né, para manter esse equilíbrio no nosso planeta de forma ruim, né, e que estão destruindo esse planeta mesmo pela questão econômica, né. Então, eu acho que é um filme mais direto e fala dessa questão ambiental, né, de como o que vai... Eu no filme eu falo, né, que eu acredito que a gente não vai sobreviver, né, as mudanças que estão acontecendo, as mudanças climáticas e tudo isso que a gente está fazendo com o planeta, eu acredito que a gente não vai sobreviver. Apesar de ter utilizado a personagem Capora enquanto entidade, assim, o discurso é bem naquilo que eu acredito mesmo, sabe?
And so in the second film, I used the same image, this indigenous this entity Kaipora, but I used a language that was more accessible to the non-indigenous peoples. And I think the message got across much clearer, the idea that we live on this beautiful planet, this precious, unique planet, and yet we're doing so much destruction that we're taking this beautiful place it's starting to look to me like we're not going to survive. The planet's not going to survive with us on it. And so my idea with this film was to bring these indigenous concepts into dialogue with the broader, so that non-indigenous people could understand it. And maybe Leticia, I'm wondering if you could talk about, I remember the beautiful film, the Arpilleras, about the work between the Chilean women who had survived, whose husbands and family members had been disappeared in the dictatorship, creating, out of fragments of the clothing of their loved ones, these textiles, political textiles, and then the work that went on, the collaboration with the mob, with the movement of the people affected by dams. I thought that was a very powerful use of film to create, use of art to create this kind of dialogue between people who have been affected in different ways. And I love the phrase in the film that talks about memory is like, I think it was, memory is like gravity. It brings things together. And when you lose memory, you sort of lose your existence.
This both films, movies, I think, Arpilheiras and Agente Rio of Carolina, make this connection with people, affected people. So it's very important. In the Carolinas movie, the movie talk about 4 different situations of affected people in 4 regions of Brazil. There Mabi is together with these people. So about the Itaipu dam, hydroelectric dam, and about Belo Monte hydroelectric dam, and the resistance of the people of Vale do Ribeira in São Paulo state that avoid a dam, a construction of a dam in our lands, and about this crime here in Mariana, where I live and where Simone lived too. And in Arpilheiras, we talk about one case of each region of Brazil too. So we talk about women affected in 4 regions in Brazil too. It's very important to sharing this information, and affected people like to see the movie too, because it's important to know what other people are suffering in Brazil, and it's very important for our struggles too. Here in the Mariana's case, in where the dam broke 5 years ago, we continue the struggle, but few actions are being doing by the company, like Simone says. So it's very important to continue this struggle. The movement of people affected by dams exists in Brazil for more than 30 years. So we are talking about this and organizing the struggles of affected people, making pressure actions of pressure, of popular pressure to change the situation, to struggle for rights, and to struggle for environmental actions, correct environmental actions, because the companies did many environmental actions and waste money with this, and make make advertising about this, that the companies are doing many things to the people and to the river, but we know that it's not true. The river is not recovered, and we think that only the affected people can recover the river and reorganize our lives. With the money of the companies, because the companies are responsible for our, they need to be responsible for what happened, but with our organization of the affected people to recover their lives and their environmental too.
And another important point, I think, just having two guests, one non-Indigenous, one Indigenous guest on in this discussion, is to consider this historical collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples around environmental issues. I mean, when you think back into the 1970s, it was almost like Indigenous and non-Indigenous forest peoples were pitted against each other. It was the rubber tappers versus the Indigenous peoples, and then with Chico Mendes and the Forest Peoples Movement and the Belo Monte meeting in the 1980s, this big meeting where Indigenous and non-Indigenous forest peoples joined together to fight the causes that were oppressing both of them. And then now with through the dams movement, it goes beyond forest peoples to a whole class of people that have been affected: Indigenous, non-Indigenous, forest people, Amazonian peoples, non-Amazonian peoples moving into Mariana and all these things. So I think it's been an interesting historical process of joining together rather than typically these these powers, the large economic powers, are very good at conquering by dividing people, pitting each other. Having you two on the show together shows there's this movement to unify different affected peoples into a broader movement. And I think that's a very important element of this conversation today. Olinda, eu estava dizendo que historicamente, quando a gente pensa lá atrás, nos anos 70, tinha muita divisão, né? Os povos, os seringueiros contra os indígenas no Acre. E aí um elemento importante é esse movimento de juntar os povos da floresta, indígenas, não indígenas, povos da floresta, povos não da floresta, outros atingidos, num movimento mais ampla entre os povos afetados. Não sei se você comentar sobre essas colaborações entre indígenas e não indígenas. Se either one of you could comment on that.
Eu acho que isso aconteceu a partir do momento que esses povos também começam a entender que eles tinham muito mais coisas parecidas, né, em comum do que não em comum, assim. Eu acho que comunidades tradicionais, quilombolas, ribeirinhas e MST, e tem algumas outras aí, que, na verdade, né, estão vivendo as mesmas situações, que é a questão territorial, né, que é o latifúndio querendo tomar esses territórios, né, e que eles acabam chegando naquele que estão mais próximos, né, e vai E isso fez com que as próprias comunidades percebessem, né, essa importância de se juntar enquanto povos, de se juntar enquanto comunidades, para poder se fortalecer, né? E isso aqui mesmo, no meu povo, por exemplo, aconteceu muito com o pessoal do MST, né? Então, é mais no sentido de preservar as sementes, no sentido de desenvolver mesmo, sentar e se desenvolver enquanto comunidade, né? O que precisa fazer para se manter? Eu acho que nesse sentido da sobrevivência mesmo, né? Sobrevivência alimentar, né? E pensar uma forma das comunidades tradicionais se manter sem precisar tanto, né, do governo e se organizar internamente. E isso fez com que a gente acabasse tendo mais subsídio para poder lutar pela própria terra, né? Porque quando o território aqui do meu povo, passou uma época que era muito a FUNAI que administrava tudo, né? Então, foi a partir do próprio SPI que a gente perdeu a terra, né? Que arrendou as terras para os fazendeiros e chegou um momento que os fazendeiros não queriam mais sair das terras. Então, a partir desse momento que a gente se organiza enquanto povo e começa a ter esses encontros com outras comunidades que já passaram ou que estavam passando por dificuldade, a gente começa a se entender melhor esses espaços, né? E a importância, né, da gente cultivar dentro desses espaços, né, para poder se manter mesmo ali. E hoje eu entendo que é uma das coisas que mais tem despertado nessa essa ira, né, do latifúndio, do agronegócio, é saber que essas comunidades realmente estão conseguindo, né, sobreviver, porque acaba que o governo também fica muito... Teve uma época que ficava muito naquilo de tentar dar algumas coisas às comunidades, né, vamos supor, cesta básica, e ficar, né, mantendo a comunidade ali, né, de uma forma meio que presa ao próprio governo. E eu acho que a partir desse momento que essas comunidades se entendem a importância, né, desse território, e mesmo com todas as dificuldades, começam a cultivar melhor esse território, né, para alimentar suas famílias. Isso também impede que muitas pessoas saiam de dentro dos seus territórios e vá tentar sobreviver fora dele. Isso fez com que as comunidades ficassem no território, né? E eu acho que isso é muito importante.
Deixa eu traduzir muita coisa já. So she had a very long, interesting session. I'll try to summarize. Basically, the idea was that at some point, we realized that we shared a lot of conflicts and problems in common with non-indigenous traditional communities, Quilombos, riverine people, and other and the MST, the landless movement in Brazil, and so when you come to realize that that despite the cultural differences, that a lot of the same processes that you're going through and the conflicts are the same, it allows you to organize at a broader level. And so back, you know, in going back into the 70s in her lands, in the Tupinambá lands, there was a process of when one administrative unit, the Indigenous Protection Unit, there was a transition from something called SPI to the modern FUNAI. And when that happened, there was lots of landowners who were leasing land from the indigenous peoples to farm on. And then when that transition happened, the farmers didn't want to go anywhere. They said, "This is our land. We're not giving it back." And so suddenly her people found themselves in a situation similar to the landless people, the Sem Terra, the landless people's movement. And so because of that similar situation, despite the cultural differences, they were able to unite and join together and discover they have a lot of things in common. And, you know, one of the things that government programs, they're set up supposedly to help the people, but what they end up doing is they create dependency. And when with the landless people have organized these, they're called festivals. They're called seed festivals, where people from different indigenous communities trade seeds and trade knowledge And what it does is it gives these people's autonomy. They can organize themselves by themselves without all this help from the government, and they're able to sustain themselves on the land. And this seems what makes the corporations and the government most upset, is that people can organize themselves and feed themselves. And another thing I'd like to talk about, do you have anything else to add to that, Leticia? This idea of creating coalitions?
Yes, I agree with Olinda that these communities, non-indigenous and indigenous communities, begin to stay more close when all the communities understand that we are suffering the same violations, the same right violations. And in this Mariana Dam broke, two indigenous people were affected, Krenak and Tupiniquim. And in Brumadinho's dam broke too. There are the Pataxós indigenous group that was affected too. And here in this region, in Minas Gerais state, there are some traditional black communities affected too. I don't know how to say in English, quilombolas, but if Glenn knows, but they are traditional black communities that were affected too in the crimes, the dam breaks here. And now in the Bolsonaro government, we are more together than ever, I think, to go straight to this government. And because of the violations we all are suffering now, so it's so important to resist and to put it out. And so we are more together to do these struggles too.
And another point I'd like to raise about the different films that were in this screening is there's a diversity of film languages, from sort of straight ahead documentaries to something the capoeira, more of a mythological element, and then the other film that's sort of more science fiction. So maybe the two of you could comment about how the same idea of the example that Olinda gave. Well, my first film didn't quite reach a large enough audience. It was too focused on the indigenous. How people in different social movements can use different forms of art from the what do you call it, the sewing project, to film, different genres of film, documentary, cell phones, more speculative things up to science fiction. How does art and artistic production contribute to these movements and create this sort of unity? Maybe we'll start with Leticia, and then I'll translate for Olinda to her to comment on that.
It's a difficult question for me because I'm not an artist like Olinda. But I think about the work we have on the movement. I think we use much the documentaries when we want to denounce what the companies are doing. So we use so much the documentaries. But I think when we want to talk about what we want in the future, what we desire to be the future, I think we use science fiction, maybe, because it's so difficult to imagine what we want, and that it's possible to build another society where there are no right violations, there are environmental respect. So I think it's a good idea use the science fiction. And about the videos that the people do with the cell phone, we are using so much now in the pandemic moment, and it changes the relationship with this the technology, and we between the people too, because you can make the video and we can use for many objectives. So we need to organize well for what to use the video or not, because like Simone said in the video, there are some situations in this crime, in Mariana crimes, that the other side, the companies, and one of the companies are a British company, BHP Billington. So the companies use this technology to talk with the people too, and use the videos making by the affected to advertise about the reparation process, what the company are doing. So this way to organize what we want with the videos, with the movies, it's so important too, because if you want to do without thinking about what the consequence of this, many affected can do, many of us of the coordination of the movement can do, and the companies use for what they want. It's a big preoccupation for us in MAB too. But we use so much the documentaries.
And what was it like to work with Carolina Caicedo on this project?
You can repeat the first word?
What was it like to work with Carolina Caicedo on this collaboration?
It's so important for us to work with Carolina. She moved in many places here in the Mariana area, so in other cities near here, and she talked in the movie about the lives, the affected lives, in fact. So it's important to show the way of life of these people and how they survive in their environmental space, how they use the river, and how they cannot do this anymore after the dams, the construction of the dams after the dam broke. So it's interesting to give space to this team of way of life. That is the thing that the companies cannot reorganize anymore. The companies cannot do this, could not do this until now. Recover this relationship with people and river. So it's important to show what the people use, what the people do in their lives, to show that the companies cannot do this anymore, cannot reorganize this, and the people can reorganize this, but they need to be permitted, to be allowed to do this, because the company don't allow people to organize their own life. So it's a big problem. The company wants to do all the things and all the actions, so there is no space to the affected to reorganize their lives, what they in the way they want and the way they need to reorganize their lives.
Então, Olinda, a minha pergunta era essa dimensão. Você falou que fez um primeiro filme mais indígena, outro com outra linguagem. Então, a minha pergunta era sobre como funcionam essas diferentes linguagens, desde um filme deles que é mais documentário, o teu filme já um pouco mais especulativo, usando personagens da entidades indígenas, caipora, e já aquele outro filme que a gente assistiu, que é a ficção científica pura. Como você vê o papel dessas linguagens, diferentes linguagens artísticas e de alcance, de comunicação audiovisual para a questão ambiental e social?
Bom, eu percebi que quando, às vezes, assim, na verdade, eu percebi que a questão indígena ainda é muito nova, mesmo para o brasileiro, né? Assim, porque quando eu passo o filme, consigo perceber que muita gente não consegue entender parte dos filmes, justamente por não conhecer, né? Não tá tão próximo dessa questão da questão indígena. Eu me percebi, assim, um pouco, sabe, meio que, poxa, a gente tem contato, né? Esse contato com a sociedade há mais de 520 anos e mesmo assim ainda somos tão estranhos, né? Então, assim, elementos, né, e algumas linguagens que eu uso no filme ainda são tão estranhos para a população. Isso me despertou, na verdade, uma vontade de querer produzir mais, sabe? De através dos filmes, nos aproximar das pessoas, sabe? No sentido de que elas comecem a perceber. Talvez até porque hoje eu acho que essa questão mesmo de se trabalhar um pouco essa questão do preconceito, e vários indígenas também estão utilizando as redes sociais, né, para se expressar, para, né, divulgar o que tem acontecido. Eu acho que isso tem melhorado um pouco, mas eu ainda acho que está com começo isso, esse olhar que as pessoas têm sobre quem são os povos indígenas, né? Minha comunidade, por exemplo.
Well, this was exactly the experience that she had with her first film, where she made a film and you know, using lots of indigenous concepts, and felt like that non-indigenous people didn't understand it, and she thought that was strange because, you know, there's been 520 years of contact and relationship, and it made her realize how distant indigenous peoples, how non-indigenous people still don't really understand indigenous livelihoods, indigenous concepts. And so, but rather than getting frustrated at it, it stimulated her to do more work with film and try to find a film language that could communicate more broadly. Today, with Facebook and Instagram and lots of indigenous people having cell phones, she sees how there's more communication between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples through these new platforms. And it's helping in a certain way. And then that sort of reminds me of, but it's sort of a two-edged sword, because in my own work with the Kayapo, I've worked, as Francesca noted at the beginning, I've worked for the past 10 years helping Kayapo, different indigenous filmmakers, mostly Kayapo filmmakers, make their own films. And it's a very, I mean, the way that digital technology has gotten so much cheaper, so much more accessible. The Kayapo have their own drone now. They have their own cameras. But there's sort of this it's like a double bind where indigenous peoples have been forced for 500 years. You have to learn Portuguese. You have to learn to read and write. You have to wear Western clothes. You can't run around naked. And so indigenous peoples, any religion, you know, you have to have Christian religion. Your shamanism is the devil's work. There's been this tremendous pressure on indigenous peoples to assimilate and to learn Portuguese and to wear clothes and so on. And yet once they assimilate and they have a video phone or a camera, people say, oh, you're not Indians anymore. You wear clothes. You don't have you're using cameras. You aren't Indians anymore. So there's like this double bind where, you know, if they don't speak Portuguese, they don't dress, and they aren't Christians, then they're not really citizens. They can't participate in the global economy, and they're sort of second-rate citizens. But once they finally do adapt and become Christian, then you're not Indians anymore. You don't have any special rights. And there's people who see an Indian filming with a camera think, oh, that's not an Indian anymore. They've lost their culture. They're using cameras, and I think it's important for the thing about when indigenous people make their own films, they can broadcast their own messages without intermediaries. And in the case of the Kayapo, they found a way of incorporating the cameras and the filmic language in a very Kayapo way of filming. The way they shoot, the way they shoot and edit, the way they use the cameras has to do with this long tradition of Kayapo uses of capturing weapons from their enemies, of reinterpreting body ornaments. And so there's this long tradition in Kayapo warfare of taking the enemy's weapons and using them against the enemy. And so the use of film technology fits into that same logic. And so rather than seeing them as, oh, they're not Kayapo anymore because they use cameras, it's actually they're more Kayapo because they can use the cameras to transmit their own voices. And sort of as a final thought, I'm going to ask you both to think about sort of from these different levels we've talked about, unifying people from, non-Indigenous, Indigenous peoples, people from different parts of Brazil, using media, looking at these long-term historical processes. How do each of your own individual, your own collective projects fit into the broader dimension of the global movement towards climate, to climate stability and global change, in the social, economic, and climate realms? How do you see your movement fitting into those broader questions? Sorry, start with Leticia, then I'll translate.
Yes, about climate change. Yes, the question. Yes, I understand. I think all the situations with dams and others with agribusiness, they contribute to the climate change. And for us, from the movement of people affected by dams, there is a model, a society model, an energy model, and a mining model, mainly that we talk in the movement, the mining model and the energy model, that put these situations, put the people in these situations, put the environment in these situations. So it's we need to change these models. We need to talk about this with people, with affected people and with other people that live in Brazil and other countries about these mining models and this energy model to change the situation, but it's not so easy. And nowadays in Brazil, there are many dams in risk. 45 is the official number, but maybe there are many others in risk. So the companies continue to don't do anything about these risks in the dams, and the energy model the same way, continue to building dams without any respect of about the affected and any debate, environmental debate. And so it's a big problem, and we know that it's contributes to the climate change. But we think that is organizing organizing people that we can change this situation. We can go ahead with the situation and change the relationship between human beings and environment. This is the big point that we need to change, and the society we live don't permit this, don't allow this change. So you need to change the models, the society, and first the people, organizing people and making more collective sense with this. It's not only the way you act, but a necessity to change and make collective actions that change our individual actions and change the society and change other people. And in MAP, in the movement of people affected by dams, we said that land, energy, mining, and water are not for merchandising. They need to be for the people's sovereignty. So it's an important statement to continue the struggles.
Yeah, certain things should not be turned into merchandise. This is what the great indigenous writer Davi Kopanawa talks about, the love of merchandise, this sort of capitalist system that values merchandise over life, and that's a very, very dangerous trend that we're all living with the effects of. Então, Olinda, como finalizando, a pergunta é como que o seu trabalho local, né, os seus filmes, seu trabalho com seu povo na sua região, como isso se conecta com o movimento global sobre mudanças climáticas?
Eu acho que não só o meu, né, mas eu acho que os filmes, né, dos povos indígenas tá muito conectado com a questão territorial e do território mesmo, e não consegue se distanciar da questão ambiental e falar dessa questão ambiental, falar do território, falar da importância desse território. A gente sabe que dentro dos territórios indígenas, né, é onde se está a maior biodiversidade desse país, né, que se mantém mais fortemente conservada, e eu acho que se conecta nesse sentido, né, da gente pensar isso para o futuro, né, a gente sabe que a gente precisa, né, desse espaço de diversidade sem destruir, né, e eu acho que a gente pensa sobre isso, a gente pensa no nosso futuro que tenha isso, e eu acho que dessa forma a gente acaba se conectando, né? Não só o meu, mas todos os trabalhos indígenas, né? A gente perceber essa importância mesmo do que é, né, essa terra para a gente, do que é estar com essa biodiversidade conservada para a nossa sobrevivência. Não se trata apenas da nossa sobrevivência, né? Na verdade, a sobrevivência do próprio planeta depende disso, e eu acho que a gente consegue enxergar isso, sabe?
Very interesting response, sort of a very different response from Leticia's response, but complementary, not in a bad way, not in a conflicting way, very complementary. She said that, well, it's not just my work by itself, it's all indigenous filmmakers and all indigenous movements connect together around the theme of territory, because it's the territory that provides indigenous people with environmental stability, with food, with climate stability. And because indigenous lands are the most biodiverse lands in Brazil in national level, and then globally, the same thing globally, indigenous lands have the largest percent of biodiversity. I think I was reading a statistic where it's like 60% of global biodiversity is concentrated, over 50% is concentrated in indigenous lands, which are like less than, I don't know, 20% of the Earth's surface. And we indigenous people need this biodiversity for the future. We think about the future in terms of our survival, our ability to eat and to survive. And so in this sense, by preserving this biodiversity for our own future, for all of these diverse indigenous groups' future, this becomes a key for our survival, but survival for the whole planet by preserving biodiversity. So I thought it was a very interesting, very different take on the question of global, local connections, but very complementary. And then I guess I just want to thank you both for this very interesting conversation. I wish we could go on much longer. You made very different films, very complementary, very nice work, and I hope to see more of your work in the future. And I hope you all stay safe in these difficult and dangerous times. And finally, we thank Francesca and University of Kent and the Barbican for organizing this wonderful event. And we hope all of you out there can manage to stay safe. Thank you very much.